I just want us to review that we saw a brisa yesterday, which is the subject of a machlokas between Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi and Rava. The brisa essentially says that it's going on the pasuk of Yevamo Yavo Aleha, that the Yavam shall have intimacy with her, and the brisa says mitzvah. This teaches me that it's a mitzvah. Now, the brisa then elaborates in a very cryptic fashion and says, before this girl ever got married, she was available to anyone, including you, the Yavam. Then she married your brother, and she became usher. Then your brother died, and she now becomes available to you. You might think that she goes back to her original state of availability. Therefore, the Torah says, Yevamo Yavo Aleha, that it's a mitzvah. So Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi has one way of interpreting it. He says that this brisa goes according to Abba Shol, which means that the Torah is telling you, don't think that just like you had all options available to you, and it didn't matter what your intentions were when this girl was originally single and available, you could marry her for any reason. So too you could marry her for any possible reason, whether you fall in love with her beauty or whether you want to do it for altruistic reasons. It doesn't matter. No, the Torah says mitzvah, which means li mitzvah. Your intention when you marry her can only be for the sake of the mitzvah of yibum, and therefore Abba Shol learns that if your intention is not honorable for the mitzvah, you're not allowed to do yibum. Right? So therefore, Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi says that this brisa goes according to Abba Shol. Comes along Rav and says, no, I hold that this brisa is not addressing that issue. It goes according to the Rabbanan, who say that Yevamo Yavo Aleha Mikol Makom, that no matter what your intentions are, there's still a mitzvah of Yibum. And what the brisa means is simply this. Before this girl ever got married and she was single, there was no obligation for you to dafka marry that particular girl. And therefore, even now, when she's a Yevama, you might think that she goes back to that status that you have completely open options of whether to do Yibum or do Chalitza. There's no particular obligation. So comes along the Torah and says, no, it's a mitzvah. Whereas in her previous status, it was purely optional for you to marry her. Now there's a mitzvah for you to marry her. But the brisa, according to Rava, is not addressing a person's intentions, and it's really just addressing the fact that it's preferred to do yibum. There's a lechatchila, there's a mitzvah for you to do yibum, not like when she was originally a single girl, where there was no mitzvah to marry her. So now the Gemara is going to challenge that. It says Ema Reisha, some have the gears of Ema Seifa. There's a second. It's the bottom line of Lamed Tes Amid Beis. There's a second part to this brisa, and the second part of the brisa has a parallel discussion about another mitzvah, the mitzvah of menachos. What's the mitzvah of menachos? A person brings a flower offering to the temple. The Kohen does something called kemitza, where he takes a fistful of flour, places it on the altar, and the remnant of the flour is supposed to be eaten by the Kohen. So the Torah uses excessive verbiage. It says, matzos te'achel b'makom kadosh. It says that the unleavened flour has to be eaten in a holy place. Now the Torah had already said that whatever's left over is supposed to be eaten by Aaron and his sons. So this whole second part of the pasuk is superfluous. So the brisa tells me that extra verbiage teaches me mitzvah, that it's dafka a mitzvah to do so. Shabbat chila haisa alav bichlal heter nesra v'chazra v'hutra. Because just like we said by this girl, so too by the flour. Originally, when you have flour in the marketplace, it's completely permissible. You do with it whatever you want. Then you sanctify it as a mincha, so it now becomes prohibited until the act of kemitza is done. Once kemitza is done, the flour becomes permissible once again. Yachal tachzar lehetera harishon, you might think that it goes back to its completely permissible original status without any limits. Tamulomar matzos te'achel b'makom kadosh, and therefore that's what the end part of the pasuk is telling you. No, that it has to be eaten unleavened in a holy place. So mitzvah, that it's a mitzvah. So that's the end of the brisa. So the Gemara's question now is like this: if the brisa is creating a parallel between the status of the girl before and after her marriage to the brother, And the Torah is making a parallel comparison to the status of the flower before and after it's sanctified, right? So then let's subject it to the learning of Rava and the learning of Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi. So the Gemara says, Bishlam Rava, the Amar Hamani Rabbanani, Hacha Hachi Ka'amar. So if you learn like Rava, who says that the Brisa goes like the Chachamim, and it's not telling you any big kunz other than there's a mitzvah to marry the girl, and so too we would say the parallel is the mitzvah to eat the mincha. So matzos te'achel b'makom kadosh mitzvah, shebatchila haisalav bichlal heter ratza ochla ratza eina ochla. Because originally by this flower, it was the same thing as this girl. You want to eat the flower, you can eat it. You don't want to eat the flower, you don't have to eat it. It's the same thing by the girl. Before she ever gets married, you can marry her, you don't have to marry her. Nesra chazra v'hutra, and then the flower becomes usr because you sanctified it. And then after the kamitza, the flower becomes edible once again. Yachol tachzor lahetera harishon, so you might think that it goes back to its original state of permissibility, ratza ochla, ratza ena ochla, that you have the option of either eating it or not eating it. So the Gemara jumps in here at this point, interrupts the statement mid-sentence, and it says, what are you talking about, ratza ena ochla? V'haksiv, doesn't the pasuk say, v'achalu osam asher kupar bahem? The Torah says that there's an obligation for the Kohen to eat the shiarei hamincha, the leftovers, because malamed shakohanim ochlim ubalam miskapim, because the only time that the bringer of the flour gets a full atonement is if the Kohen actually eats the shirayim, eats the leftover flour. So ela ratza hu ochla ratza kohen acher ochla. But rather, the way you understand the brisa would be is that you might think that just like by the flour before it was sanctified, it was open for anyone to eat, so too, after the kamitza, it's open to any Kohen to eat. Either the Kohen who did the kamitza can eat it, or some other Kohen can eat it. So therefore, Talmud Lomar, matzos te'achel b'makom kadosh mitzvah. And therefore, the Torah's dafka telling me, it adds these extra words to tell me, no, there's dafka a mitzvah for the Kohen who did the kamitza to go ahead and eat the flour, eat the leftover flour. So that's exactly parallel to our discussion, according to Rav, about the previous case of Yibum, that before this girl was open for anyone to marry her, and now that she got married and her husband dies, there's dafka a mitzvah for this guy, the brother, for Shimon, to go ahead and marry her, right? Very, very parallel, very, very comparable.
Yes, but it is, although it's parallel, but it's a different situation.
You can create differences, but structurally, it's parallel. So Ella, but the question the Gemara asks now is like this: Ella the Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi the Amar Abba Sholhi Hachamai Trei Gavni Ika. But if you're going to learn the brisa like Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi, who's telling you that it's going like Abba Shol, and remember, what did Abba Shol say? That it all depends on your intentions, as to what your intentions are when you marry the girl. You have to have pure intentions. So there's two possibilities. You either have ulterior motives, or you have pure intentions. And therefore the Torah is telling you, le mitzvah. Your intention must be for the mitzvah. So let's see if we can apply that to the case of the mincha. So, my trei gavni ika, what two types of intentions are there when you're eating the mincha, or what two alternatives are there? If the Torah is just telling you to eat it in a specific way, just like you have to do yibum in a specific way to the exclusion of another way, what is the one way to eat the mincha to the exclusion of another way? Maybe you'll tell me the two alternatives by the mincha are, you can either eat it in a normative fashion, which means eat it when you're hungry, or eat it when you're fully stuffed, which is called achila gasa, which is where you eat it where you don't get any hana from it because you're actually injuring yourself by force feeding yourself. But achila gasa mishma achila, but that's not even called eating. So if the Torah uses the verb of eating, it's implicit that it doesn't mean to do achila gasa. You don't need the extra verbiage, because v'hamar reish lakish ha'ochel achila gasa b'yom ha'kippurim patra milo se'una. That if a person eats on Yom Kippur achila gasa, meaning that, let's say you had a suda hamafsekes that was like an amazing meal, that was like your plate was stacked up yay high, you fully are totally engorged with food, and then right after Yom Kippur begins, you eat a kazayas. that's not even called eating. You're not in violation of Yom Kippur because you're actually harming yourself, and therefore the Torah says you're not allowed to eat in the context of removing suffering. But here you're adding suffering. So therefore it's not called eating at all. So that can't be what the pasuk is coming to exclude. Ela rotza matzah ochla rotza chametz ochla. So that maybe another alternative would be is that there are two alternatives for eating the flour, just like there's two alternatives for yibum. One is to eat the flour in its chametz state, and one is to eat it in its non-chametz state. And maybe that's what the Torah is telling you. Matzos te'achel, you have to dafke eat it as unleavened flour. But that can't be what the pasuk is telling you, because v'hakasiv lo se'afeh chametz chelkam, that the Torah already told me in a previous pasuk that the mincha and the shirayim is not allowed to be made out of chametz. And the verbiage implies that not only the original mincha, when it's sanctified, and the kmitza has to be unleavened, but even the shirayim, even the leftover flour, has to be eaten unleavened, because it's the portion even for the Kohen has to be unleavened. So that's already covered by a previous pasuk. So that can't be what the pasuk is telling you. So ela ratza matzah ochla, ratza chalut ochla. So perhaps the two options to make it consistent with the way that we're learning it according to Abba Shaul is that just like by Yibum, you have two options: either marry her for ulterior motives or for pure motives, and the Torah is telling you you have to do it for pure motives. Same thing over here. There are two alternatives when you eat it. You can either eat it as matzah, or you can eat it as what's called chalut, which means that you take the flour, make it into dough, and instead of baking it, you boil it first. So the Torah is therefore telling you, only eat it as baked dough, do not eat it as boiled dough. Maybe that's what the Torah is telling you over here. So the Gemara says, well, wait a minute. Let's think about this for a second. Hai chalut echidami. What is the status of boiled dough? I matzahi hamatzahi. If it has the din of halachically of being matzah, so then you can't tell me that when the Torah says matzos te'achel, it's coming to exclude boiled dough, because boiled dough is also called matzah. And ve'ilo matzahi matzos amarachmana. And if it's not considered to be matzah, we have a previous pasuk where the Torah told us that it has to be unleavened matzah. So therefore, how can you tell me that the Torah over here is excluding chalut when matzah was already stated explicitly previously in the parsha? So therefore, why would I need this verbiage to exclude chalut if chalut does not have a din of matzah? So the Gemara says, La'ol amarachmana ve'ilo matzahi matzos amarachmana. Right. So the Gemara says lo la'olam emelacha matzahi ulahacha tana beikra la'akev. So really, I'll tell you like this: really, chalut, boiled dough, is considered to be matzah, and the reason why the Torah has to repeat this command that it must be eaten as matzah is the way Tosfos learns, is to tell you that even though chalut halachically has the status of matzah, but vis-a-vis this halacha of menachos, you're not allowed to eat the flour as chalut, as boiled dough. In other words, even though there are other areas of halacha where boiled dough is still considered to be matzah, but for the purposes of this halacha, it can only be eaten as baked dough, not as boiled dough, even if it's baked afterwards. So the Gemara says that would be the way that you could learn a parallel in the case of menachos, even if you learn the brisa according to Abba Shaul, the way that Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi does. That you have two alternatives of how to do the mitzvah, and the Torah is telling you do it this way and don't do it the other way. But fine, the Gemara says, but according to what you've just said, boiled dough still has the status of matzah, but not for menachos. So in what sense does it have the status of matzah? Elacholot matzahi de karmina lamai hilchasa. So in what respects does it have the din of matzah? Lomar sha'adam yotze ba yedei chavaso b'pesach. It's to tell me that if a person boils dough and then bakes it, he can fulfill the mitzvah of matzah on Pesach, which is a bagel. You could make an unleavened bagel. Unfortunately, in Toronto, they don't know how to make bagels properly. But a real bagel, like a Montreal bagel, has to be boiled first, and then you bake it. Halavai, one day, someone should open up a kosher bagel place in Toronto where it's really a bagel. They just don't know what they're doing here. Afal pi Dechalte meikara kaven dehadar afye betaner lechem oni karina bei v'adam yotze ba yedei chavasa b'pesach. Am I right? No?
Not wrong.
What?
Not wrong.
Right. Okay. So the Gemara says that that's the chiddush. The chiddush is that chalut, boiled dough, still has a din of matzah, provided that you bake it afterwards, because it's still called lechem oni, in the sense that it's unleavened. And therefore, you can be yotze your obligation on Pesach with a bagel, an unleavened bagel, provided that it's baked afterwards. But when it comes to menachos, or the shirayim of the menachos, even if you do bake it afterwards, you're not allowed to boil the dough. Let's go on to the next Mishnah. So basically, the conclusion of the Gemara is, you cannot prove conclusively how to understand the Brisa. The Brisa could be understood according to Abba Shol, it could be understood according to the Chachamim. There's two ways to do it. Mishnah. Hacholetz liyavimto harehu ke'echad min ha'achim l'nachala v'im yesham av nechasim shel av. Now, if a person performs the mitzvah of chalitza, we know that when you do yibum, you inherit the assets of the decedent. So, but if Shimon does chalitza instead of yibum, he doesn't inherit Ruvain's assets, but he is like any of the other brothers. So just like the brothers divide up Ruvain's estate among themselves, Shimon, just because he did chalitza, is not precluded from that. He'll get a portion as well. But that's only if there's no father. But if there's a father is always a closer relative than the siblings. So if the father is alive when Ruvain dies, if Yaakov is alive when Ruvain dies, Yaakov gets Ruvain's portion and none of the brothers do. Hakonis is yivimto zacha b'nechasim shel achiv. But if a person does yibum, if Shimon does yibum, he does get all of the assets of Ruvain. Rabbi Yehuda Omer ben kach uvein kach im yesham av nechasim shel av. And Rabbi Yehuda argues in one respect, and he says that's only true if Yaakov is dead. But if Yaakov, the father, is still alive when Ruvain dies, so then Yaakov gets the assets of Ruvain because he's the closer heir, he's the closer inheritor over a brother. And so even though normally the mitzvah of Yibum awards you with the estate of the decedent, that's only when there's no surviving father. But if there's a surviving father, the father gets it. So this is the machlokas between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara now says, Pshita. Isn't it obvious that if a brother does chalitza, he gets the same, he divides up with the other brothers the estate of Ruvain? No. Salkadaita chamina chalitza b'makom yibum kayama v'nishkol kulu nichsi kamash malan. I might have thought that chalitza is really just a surrogate for yibum, and therefore just like by yibum, you get the full estate of Ruvain by doing yibum, maybe by chalitza you get the full estate of Ruvain also. So the chiddush is no, that you don't. You just get like the other brothers. So the Gemara says, Ihachi harehu ke'echad min ha'achim, eino ela ke'echad min ha'achim iboilei. So the Gemara says, but then the language is a bit awry, according to the way you're understanding the chiddush. The Brisa should not have said that he becomes like one of the brothers. It should have said he only is like one of the brothers, meaning that he doesn't get the full portion of Ruvain. He only has a chelek with just like the other brothers, and that's not what the Mishnah is implying. So Elas al kadaita chamina hol va'afsida miyibum liknesei kamash malon. But rather the chiddush is like this. I might have thought that if one of the brothers does chalitza, maybe he should be penalized, because when there are other brothers, he went ahead and did chalitza, precluding the other brothers from the opportunity of doing the real mitzvah of yibum. And maybe therefore we should deprive him of having any portion of Ruvain's estate because he refused to build Ruvain's house. So comes along the Mishnah and tells us no, that we're not going to penalize you, even though you don't get the brother's estate, but you're not penalized to get less than the other brothers. You get a chelek with them as well.
Rabbi, I don't understand the havamina that if you do yibum, you get the estate. But if you do chalitza, where's the havamina that you also get the estate?
The havamina is that chalitza is a surrogate for yibum. That was the Gemara's havamina. The Gemara rejected that havamina.
I don't understand, because you're not taking on the woman as a wife.
Well, you would think that chalitza is, in all other respects, an alternative to yibum.
You're freeing her.
You're freeing her.
Yeah, I think.
But no, okay. So give it some more thought. Let's go weiter. Im yesham av. If there's a father, the father inherits the estate when Shimon does chalitza, and the brothers don't get anything at all. The Omar Mar av kodem l'chol yotze yirecho, because as we've learned before, a father takes priority over any other inheritors when the decedent leaves over no children. He takes priority to the siblings. And Hakones is Yevimto v'chulei, and if a man marries his Yevama, he gets the full estate of Ruvain. My time Yaakov al Shem Achiv Amarachmana Varekam, because the Torah says he shall arise in the stead of his deceased brother, and therefore if he rises to that occasion by doing Yibum, he gets to take over the brother's estate. Rabbi Yehuda Omer v'chuli, but Rabbi Yehuda disagrees and says that's only when the father is not alive. But if the father is still alive, then even when Ruvain does Yibum, the father gets the estate. So Amar Ula halacha kaRabbi Yehuda v'chin Amar Rabbi Yitzchak nafcha halacha kaRabbi Yehuda. These two Amoraim hold that's how we paskin. But Amar Ula v'tema Rabbi Yitzchak nafcha my time of the Rabbi Yehuda. Let's try and understand Rabbi Yehuda's reasoning. D'chsiv v'haya ha'bechor asher teiled. The Torah talking about the firstborn child that this Yevama will give birth to after doing Yibum, we had also said that pasuk could also be a reference to the Yavam himself. So the word Bechor is not just a reference to her child, but it's also a reference to the Yavam. And if that's the case, Ki Bechor, that the Yavam has the status of a Bechor. Ma Bechor ein lo b'chaye ha'av, af hainami ein lo b'chaye ha'av. Just like a Bechor cannot get any inheritance when his father is still alive, so too the Yavam cannot get any inheritance while his father is still alive, and therefore the father gets it. But you might still argue that even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that even though Shimon does not get Reuven's estate presently because his father gets it, but maybe when his father dies, maybe Shimon will get not only his portion, but he'll get back Reuven's portion. You might think that. So therefore, Midi Yaakov al Shem Aviv Ksiv, Yaakov al Shem Achiv Ksiv, Velo al Shem Aviv. So the Torah says no. The only time Shimon takes over Reuven's estate is if he can directly get it from Reuven. But if once the father takes over Reuven's estate, it's not Reuven's money anymore, it's Yaakov's money. And therefore, once Yaakov dies, his estate is divided among his heirs equitably according to the halacha. It's got nothing to do anymore with Reuven. And therefore, Shimon only gets his portion, he doesn't get Reuven's portion. So, Eima heicha deleka av delishkol nachala tiskayim mitzvahs yibum. Heicha deika av delo shokol nachala lo tiskayim mitzvahs yibum. But the Gemara says, I have a basic question. According to you, Rabbi Yehuda, that the Yavam does not get the estate because the father's alive, then maybe the whole mitzvah of Yibum doesn't apply when there's a living father. Maybe the only time that the Torah says that there's a mitzvah of Yibum is when the brother is shaykh to the Nachala because there's no father. But if there's a father alive, maybe there's bichlal no mitzvah of Yibum. So midi Yibum benachala tola rachmana yivumim biyabim vika nachala shkule vilo shakel. So the Gemara's response to that is the Torah does not create scripturally an interdependence between the mitzvah of Yibum and the inheritance. All the Torah says is do the mitzvah of Yibum, and if there's what to inherit because the father's deceased, then you can inherit the brother. But it's not telling you that you only do Yibum when there's what to inherit. And so therefore even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that there's a mitzvah of Yibum when the father's alive. So Yosef Rabbi Chanina Kara Kameda Rabbi Yanai v'Yosef v'Kamar Halacha ka Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Chanina Kara, Rabbi Chanina the expert in scripture, he's sitting in front of Rabbi Yanai, and he sits and he says the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. Amarlei puk kari krayach libra ein halacha ka Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yanai is a little bit agitated with Rabbi Chanina Kara, and he says, take your scripture, in other words, that which you recite and that which you claim to know so well, and go out into the street and recite as follows. The halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore, even when the father is alive, if Shimon does Yibum, Shimon gets the estate. Tani Tana Kameder of Nachman Ein Halacha Ka Rabbi Yehuda. There was a brisa that was taught in the presence of Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman used to have an Amora, a guy that would recite brises to him. And the fellow recited the following brisa to Rav Nachman, that the halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda. So Amar Lei Ela Kaman Kirabanan Pshita Yachid V'Rabim Halacha Kirabim. Rav Nachman's response to that statement of the brisa was, well, why do you need a brisa to tell me that? That's obvious. Anytime there's a machlokus between the Chachamim and one Tana, we always go like the Chachamim. So what's the point? What's the chiddush of the brisa? So Amar Lei Asmiyeh. So the Amora, the fellow who was reciting the brisa, says, Rebbe, that sounds like a good argument. Maybe it's an erroneous brisa, and I'll erase it from my catalog. In other words, I have in my memory a bunch of brises. If you're telling me that this brisa is overstating the obvious, then I'll just erase it from my memory. So Amar lei lo atalacha asnayach umukshahu da'akshilach ve'avchas ulamai da'avchas shapir avchas. So Rav Nachman said to him, no, let me remind you of the history of this brisa that says that we don't paskin like Rebbe Yehuda. The first time you taught it to me, you said that the brisa says the halacha is like Rebbe Yehuda, which taka is a chiddush. And I gave you various arguments as to why the brisa can't be that way, because there's so many reasons to say that we don't paskin like Rebbe Yehuda here, and that we should paskin like the Chachamim. And as a result, I told you to reverse the language of the brisa to say that the halacha is not like Rebbe Yehuda. Now that you've repeated it to me, it seems to be an overstatement of the obvious if it's just saying that the halacha is not like Rebbe Yehuda, but you should keep it in your catalog anyway as a reminder of our discussion. That's the way I'm learning the Shakla V'Tarya. Let's go on to the next Mishnah. Hacholetz liyavimto hu asur bikrovo seha v'hi asur bikrovav. This Mishnah now tells me something that we've learned before, that once a man performs the act of chalitza, this woman is like a divorcee. She's like a divorcee. And let's be very, very clear. When a man divorces his wife, all of her close relatives are usher to the man midioraisa because of erva. So, for example, his ex-mother-in-law is usher to him midioraisa. But if a man does chalitza with a woman, the Mishnah says, since she's like a divorcee, the mother of the chalutza is usher to him, but it's different. She's only usher midrabanan, and it's very important to keep this in mind, okay? So, she's usher to his relatives, he's usher to her relatives, and she's usher to his relatives. Hu usher be'ima uve'em ima, he's not allowed to marry the chalutza's mother, the grandmother, uve'em avia, either maternal or paternal grandmother, uvevita, uvevas bita, uvevas bina. He's not allowed to marry the chalutza's daughter or the granddaughter, either from a daughter or a son. Uva'achosa bisman shehi kayemes. Nor is he allowed to marry the sister of the chalutza as long as the chalutza is still alive, just like achos ishto. Achos ishto is only an erva that applies when the wife or the ex-wife is alive. But if the ex-wife dies, then a man is allowed to marry his ex-wife's sister once the ex-wife is deceased. So the same thing would be true by the chalutza. The sister is usher to him as long as the chalutza is alive, but once she dies, he can marry the sister. V'ha'achen mutarin, v'ha'achen mutarin. The next statement of the Mishnah is that even though the choletz, the man who did chalitza, is forbidden to the chalutza's relatives, but only he is. But his brothers, who didn't do the act of chalitza, are allowed to marry the relatives of the chalutza. So they can go, Shimon does chalitza, Levi is allowed to marry the chalutza's mother if he wants to, etc. V'hi asura ba'aviv uva'avi aviv. Now, let's talk about her. She is usher to marry the relatives of the choletz, the relatives of Shimon. So let's see. She's not allowed to marry Shimon's father, right? Because it's like her ex-husband's father, like her ex-father-in-law. She's not allowed to marry her father, Shimon's father's father, or now that's a grandfather. Now, by the way, what is the erva for her to marry her ex-father-in-law? The Torah prohibits kalaso, that a man is not allowed to marry his daughter-in-law, and included in that prohibition is an ex-daughter-in-law, right? That isser doesn't go away. Let me ask you something. Does the Torah prohibit a granddaughter-in-law, meaning the daughter-in-law of my son's daughter-in-law? Does the Torah prohibit that? If my grandson gets married, am I prohibited to marry that girl if he divorces her?
Didn't it say that?
Midioraisa. No. Midioraisa, the Torah does not prohibit that. In the previous case, as far as who the choletz is usher to, as far as the chalutza's relatives, all of those isurim are prohibited by the Torah in a case where he would be married to that woman. So that even though the prohibition of relatives is only midrabanan, by chalitza, the level of relation is only biblical in nature, that is prohibited by the man to the chalutza's relatives. But in the opposite, when we're talking about who the chalutz is usher as far as the choletz, as far as Shimon's relatives, that we're going even further, and we're saying even people who are what are called shnios, where they're only rabbinical ervas, are also prohibited. And the first example that we're seeing over here is a man's granddaughter-in-law. A granddaughter-in-law is only prohibited rabbinically, and yet the Mishnah says that it's still prohibited by chalitza, and we have to discuss that because that's not so pashut. Uvivno, uveven bino, and similarly, she's not allowed to marry Shimon's son or Shimon's grandson. Now, son, we understand. A man is not allowed to marry his father's wife or his father's ex-wife, and therefore the parallel is to chalutza. But what about a grandson? Is a grandson allowed to marry his grandfather's wife as long as it's not his grandma? The answer is midioraisa, yes. It's only rabbinically prohibited. So here, once again, you're dealing with a rabbinic erva, which is included by the laws of chalitza as well. Ba'achiv uveven achiv. And furthermore, she's not allowed to marry the choletz's brother, nor is she allowed to marry the choletz's brother's son, meaning the choletz's nephew. And again, it's because a man is not allowed to marry his aunt or his uncle's wife. Okay. Mutter Adam, and finally, the last line of the Mishnah, which we learned before, and it's very confusing. Mutter Adam bikrovas tsaras chalutzaso, ve'aser b'tsaras krovas chalutzaso. A man is allowed to marry the relative of the tzara of his chalutza, which means that if Reuven dies and he leaves over two wives, Shimon does chalitza with wife A, and there's a wife B. So Shimon is allowed to marry the relative of the tzara. That's perfectly legitimate. But what he's not allowed to do is that in the event that, let's say, the woman that he did chalitza with has a sister. Okay, so Shimon did chalitza with woman A, and woman A has a sister who's married to a totally different guy named Yankel. When Yankel dies, it's not permitted for Shimon to marry, not only can he not marry the sister of the chalutza, but he's not even allowed to marry the co-wife of the sister of the chalutza. Now that's clearly b'derabbanan, because there's no relationship whatsoever, and the Gemara is going to have to explain why that's permitted. Why is it okay to marry the relative of the tzara? It's usher to marry the relative of the tzara of the chalutza, but it's okay to marry the tzara of the relative of the chalutza. What's the difference between the two? The Gemara will explain. Now, ibayilahu. The question is now raised. Gazru shnios b'chalutza olo. The question, independent of our Mishnah, was raised that when we say that a man is not allowed to marry the relatives of the chalutza, how far do the relatives go? Is it only the biblical relatives of the chalutza, or is it also the rabbinical relatives of the chalutza? So be'erva de'oraisa gazru b'hu rabbanan, shnios b'chalutza lo gazru rabbanan, shnios. I'm sorry. Be'erva de'oraisa gazru b'hu rabbanan shnios, b'chalutza lo gazru rabbanan shnios, o dilma lo shna. So the question is like this. We know when a man actually has a marriage with a woman, so there's a deoraisa prohibition to her relatives, that's maybe only there do the Chachamim come along and say that there are rabbinical relatives that he's also not allowed to marry, like her great-great-grandmother, right? But maybe that's only true when he's mamish married to her, when there's a biblical erva law there. But by a chalutza, where it's not a real marriage, and therefore the relatives are only asur midrabanan, maybe the rabbis only forbade the real biblical relatives of this woman, but not the rabbinic relatives of this woman. That's our shaila. So Tashma, let's look at the Brisa. Hu asur be'ima uve'em ima, ve'ilu em ima lo ketani. Look at the Brisa, look at the Mishnah. Our Mishnah said that who is the choletz not allowed to marry? He's not allowed to marry her mother or her grandmother. But it doesn't say that he's not allowed to marry her great-grandmother, who would be a rabbinic relative. So you see from here that rabbinic relatives are permitted. The Gemara says no, because Dilma hainu taima delotani mishum tekaboy lemisna seifa va'achan mutarin v'itana aim ima hava mina ha'achan mutarin dafka be'aim ima aval be'aim ima uve'ima lo. I'll tell you why. Maybe that's not a good raya. Maybe the reason why the Mishnah, maybe really taka a cholet Shimon is usher to the rabbinic relatives of the chalutza, even her great-great-grandmother. Why then didn't the Mishnah write it? Because the next part of the Mishnah says that even though the Shimon is not permitted to marry her relatives, Shimon's brothers are allowed to marry her relatives. And if I would have listed great-grandmother in the Mishnah, I might have thought that when the Mishnah says that the brothers are allowed to marry her relatives, it's only referring to her rabbinic relatives and not permitting the brothers to marry her biblical relatives. And therefore the Mishnah completely deleted the whole discussion of rabbinic relatives, so there should be no confusion. To make sure that you understand that the brothers are even allowed to marry her biblical relatives. So the Gemara says that's not a good argument. V'lisnei aim ima, v'lisnei ha'achan mutarin bekulan. Well, you could have easily have deflected that ambiguity by saying that a choletz is not allowed to marry his chalutza's mother, her grandmother, her great-grandmother, but the achin, the brothers, are allowed to marry all of them. If you just would have used the word bekulan, that would have removed any ambiguity. So the Gemara says, you're right, Kasha. That's taka, a good point. We don't have a response to that. But the bottom line is, the Gemara still is going to deliberate over this question, even though it seems over here that the rabbinic relatives of the chalutza are not aser, but as we'll see, the Gemara says we're going to continue this line of questioning. Tashma. Let's look at the next part of the Mishnah. Hi asura ba'aviv uva'avi aviv. The chalutza, the widow who got chalitza, she's not allowed to marry Shimon's father or Shimon's grandfather. Now, Shimon's grandfather, when we look at it from his vantage point, who is this chalutza? If we look at the chalitza as like a marriage, then it's his granddaughter-in-law. It's his grandson's wife, or grandson's chalutza in this case. A grandson's wife is only asr midirabanan, it's only shnios. So ketani miha avi aviv, my love mishum choletz tahavilo kalas bino. So you see, therefore, that even in a case of chalitza connection, when it's not a real marriage, we still say that the rabbinic relatives are asr. So the Gemara says, lo, mishum meisana dahavila kalas bino. Not so, says the Mishnah. Maybe I'll tell you that there really is no prohibition of rabbinic relatives in a case of chalitza. You want to know why this girl is usher to grandpa? She's usher to grandpa not because she's the chalutza of Shimon, but rather because she's the widow of Ruvain. Because Ruvain is also grandpa's grandson. And in that case, she was actually married to Ruvain. Because she was actually married to Ruvain, that's why grandpa can't marry her, because he's mamish a granddaughter-in-law from Ruvain, but not from Shimon. If the only issue was that she was somehow had a pseudo-marriage to Shimon through chalitza, that would not be enough of a reason to prohibit a rabbinic relative like a grandfather. Toshma. Let's look at the next case. Uveven bino. That the Mishnah had said that she's not allowed to marry the grandson of Shimon. Now, what's the reason you're not allowed to marry the grandson of Shimon? Looking at it from the vantage point of the male, this woman is his grandfather's wife, or his grandfather's chalutza, which is only a rabbinic relationship. It's only a rabbinic connection. So my lav mishum choletz, isn't that because of the guy doing chalitza? And therefore you see that rabbinic relations are also prohibited from the chalitza. Dahavila eshes avi aviv, in the sense that she's now grandpa's wife, or like grandpa's wife. So you see a proof from here that rabbinic relations, rabbinic relatives, are also usher as a result of chalitza. So the Gemara says, lo, mishum meisana, v'havyala eshes achi avi aviv. So the Gemara says, no, she's not usher to Shimon's grandson because she had chalitza with Shimon. She's usher to Shimon's grandson because she was married to Ruvain, because she was married to Shimon's brother, which was a real marriage. And therefore, what is her relation to Shimon's grandson. She is Shimon's grandson's great uncle's wife. And a great uncle's wife is a rabbinic prohibition. And that's why Shimon's grandson is not allowed to marry her. Not having to do with the chalitza, but having to do with her previous marriage to Reuven. But wait a minute, says the Gemara. Ha'ameimar machshir be'eshes achi avi aviv. But wait a minute. Ameimar paskins that there's not even a rabbinic prohibition with your great uncle's wife. So how then can you explain why then would the Mishnah prohibit it over here if according to Ameimar it's never prohibited? A great uncle's wife is never prohibited. So the Gemara answers, Ameimar mukila bar bira disaba. Ameimar has a creative reading of our Mishnah. He doesn't read the Mishnah when it says that the chalutza is not allowed to marry the grandson. It's not referring to Shimon's grandson, it's referring to Yaakov's grandson. Meaning that since the previous case of the Mishnah told me that she's usher to Shimon's father, it now tells me that she's usher to Shimon's father's grandson, which turns out to be Shimon's son, not Shimon's grandson. So, ihachi hainu achiv uben achiv. So the Gemara says, well, the Mishnah already lists. Why is she usher to Shimon's son? Because she was married to Reuven, and so you're telling me that she's usher to marry her nephew, right? Her nephew through marriage. That's already explicitly mentioned in the Mishnah, that she's not allowed to marry Shimon's brother, and she's not allowed to marry Shimon's brother's son. So that's already mentioned in the Mishnah. If you're telling me that the reason why she's usher is because she was Reuven's wife and Shimon's son is therefore her deceased husband's nephew, that's already mentioned in the Mishnah. So the Gemara says that's not such a kasha because Tana achiv min ha'av u'katani achiv min ha'em. The Mishnah lists both cases. The Mishnah lists a case of where she's usher to her deceased husband's brother's son when it's a half-brother through the mother or a half-brother through the father. So that's not such a problem. Let's go on. Tashma de Tani Rabbi Chia. Now let's look at a brisa that Rabbi Chia taught. Arba midivrei Torah va'arba midivrei Sofrim. That when we say that a chalutz is not allowed to marry her, the relatives of Shimon's relatives, 4 of those relatives are biblical relatives, and 4 of those relatives are rabbinic relatives. Av uvno achiv uben achiv midivrei Torah. So what are the 4 biblical relatives? Shimon's father, Shimon's son, Shimon's brother, and Shimon's nephew. All of those are biblical relatives, such that if she were actually married to Shimon, they would mamish be erva to her. But avi aviv va'avi imo ben beno ven bito midivrei sofrim. But when says the brisa, what are the rabbinic relatives that she's not allowed to marry? Shimon's grandfather, either from his father or from his mother, and Shimon's grandson, either from his son or from his daughter. So Ketani Miha Avi Aviv. So you see that the Brisa prohibits Shimon's grandfather, even though a man is only rabbinically prohibited, is only rabbinically related to his granddaughter-in-law. So my lav mishum choletz v'havi lakalas beno. So you see that in the case of chalitza, we do prohibit rabbinic relatives. Lo mishum meisana dahavi lakalas beno. So once again, the Gemara says no. According to this brisa, also the reason why she's prohibited is not because of the chalitza. She's prohibited because she was married to Reuven, and because she was married to Reuven, she is the daughter-in-law of the Havila Kalas Beno. In other words, she's grandpa's she's grandpa's granddaughter-in-law, not through Shimon with the Chalitza, but rather through the decedent Reuven. Tashma Avi Imo. But now let's take a look at the next case. We said that she's usher also to Shimon's mother's father, to grandpa through Shimon's mother. So my lav mishum choletz dahavi lokalas bito, lo mishum mesana dahavi lokalas bito. So once again, it sounds like there's a rabbinic relative who's usher because of the chalitza. Once again, the Gemara says no. She's related to the guy. She's related to grandpa through her deceased husband Reuven. So that's not a proof. Toshma uven beno. The next case of the brisa was that she's usher to marry Shimon's grandson through his son. Now here too, that's only a rabbinic relative. My lav mishum choletz tahavila eshes avi aviv, where it's a man is not allowed to marry his grandfather's wife. That's only a rabbinic a prohibition, and here through chalitza. So we see that even by chalitza, we aser rabbinic relatives. Lo mishum meisana tahavila eshes achi avi aviv. So the Gemara says no. Once again, we answer it's only because she's related through Ruvain, her deceased husband, and in which case the guy that she's not allowed to marry is her grandnephew through her deceased husband, and that's a rabbinic prohibition, but it's based on her marriage, not based on her chalitza. So Vaha Amemer Machshir Be'eshes Achi Avi Aviv. So the Gemara says, but let's go back to Amemer. Amemer says it's not even a rabbinic prohibition by a grandnephew. So the Gemara answers, Amemer Mokim La Mishum Choletz Ukesaver Gazru Shnios Bachalutza. So the Gemara says, I have to admit defeat in that case. You're right. According to Ameimar, in this price of Rabbi Chia, the only way that you can understand it is that Ameimar does agree that when it comes to Chalitza, even Shnios, even rabbinic relatives are going to be Aser. But it could be that if you don't learn like Ameimar, maybe you don't have to say that. Maybe there is no rabbinic relative that is prohibited as a result of Chalitza. Tashma, let's look at the last case of the Brisa. Uven Bito. That you're not allowed, she's not allowed to marry Shimon's grandson through his daughter. My love mishum choletz tahavila eshes avi imo. So isn't this once again a man is not allowed to marry his grandfather's wife, and that's only a rabbinic prohibition, and it's a product of chalitza. Lo mishum meisana tahavila eshes achi avi imo. So the Gemara says no. Once again, we'll give the same answer. She's not usher to him because of the chalitza that makes it like it's grandpa's wife. She's usher to him because of her marriage to Ruvain, grandpa's brother, Ruvain, and so therefore he's usher. He can't marry her because it's his great uncle's wife. And that's the rabbinic prohibition, but it's a rabbinic prohibition because of the marriage that she had, not because of the chalitza. Frek the Gemara v'hagabi shnios the v'lo gazru. But 1 second, the Gemara says, the most that anyone's prepared to say is that you're not allowed to marry your great uncle's wife if it's your great uncle through your father. But if it's your great uncle through your mother, meaning it's your mother's father's brother, everyone agrees in that case that it's perfectly permitted, even midrabanan, to go ahead and marry that guy's wife. In which case, it's impossible to say over here that the reason why the guy can't marry this woman is because of a rabbinic relation that's through Ruvain. It can only be through Shimon as a result of the fact that it's grandpa's wife, and Shimon is grandpa. So therefore, the Gemara's conclusion is Elalav mishum choletz ushmamina gozu shnias b'chalutz ushmamina. In the final analysis, says the Gemara, you see very clearly from this brisa that the rabbis did institute prohibitions of rabbinic relatives in addition to biblical relatives as a result of the chalitza. The chalitza, even though the relatives of a chalitza are only prohibited rabbinically, because the chalitza only creates that marriage rabbinically to prohibit the relatives to each other. But the Chachamim said we're going to go that far to say that not only are the biblical relatives of the choletz and the chalutza prohibited, but even the rabbinic relatives of the choletz and chalutza are also prohibited. That's the conclusion of the Gemara. I know it's confusing to get all of the family members straight, but that's the bottom line. We continue with the last few lines. Mutter adam v'chulei. A man is allowed to marry krovas tzoras chalutzaso. He's allowed to marry the relative of the tzara of his chalutza. A man has relations with the tzara of a chalutza, the child is a mamzer. What he's essentially saying is like this. If Reuven died and he left over 2 wives, and one of the wife A got chalitza, then wife B reverts back to an Eishasach. And as an Eishasach, she's an erva to all of the brothers. And therefore, if I go ahead and I have a relationship with that tzara, I'm having relations with an erva, and therefore the child will be a mamzer. My taima bi isura kayama. The reason is it reverts back to being an Eishasach. Now that's unlike a chalutza. If I do chalitza with a woman, and then I go ahead and have relations with her, and she has a child, that child is not a mamzer. because there's only a mitzvah lo saseh, right? Because the Torah says, Kevin Shabana Shuv Lo Yivna. The Torah says that once you didn't build the house, by doing Yibum, you're not allowed to build it again. Once you do Chalitza, you don't have the right to have anything to do with that woman anymore, the Chalutza. But it's not that she's an Ereva, but that she's only a mitzvah lo saseh. If you have relations with a mitzvah lo saseh woman and you have a child from that, the child is not a mamzer. So we're saying that there's an inherent difference between the Chalutza and the tzara of the Chalutza. By the Chalutza, she does not revert back to an Eishesach, but the tzara of the Chalutza reverts back to an Eishesach. So the Gemara now says, Omer Rav Yosef af ananomi tanina, muter adam bikrovas tzaras chalutzasa. This can be borne out by our Mishnah, because the Mishnah says that a person is allowed to marry the relative of the tzara of the chalutza. Now, iyamart bishlama tzara avroi mishum hachi muter ba'achosa. If you tell me that the tzara is unlike the chalutza, and she reverts back to an eishes ach, then it makes very good sense as why you're allowed to marry her, because the tzara has nothing to do with the chalutza. The tzara is not like a surrogate chalutza. However, iyamar tzara ka chalutza damya amai mutter. But if you're going to tell me that the tzara is just like the chalutza, which means that when Shimon does chalitza with A, it's as if he did chalitza with both A and B, then why would Shimon then be allowed to marry the relative of B? Because if B is like a chalutza as well, then just like I'm not allowed to marry the relatives of the chalutza, I shouldn't be allowed to marry the relatives of the tzara as well. The fact that I'm allowed to marry the relatives of the tzara is an indication that she's not like a chalutza, and therefore she reverts back to being an eishesach. That's the proof. Let us say that statement itself is a contradiction to Rabbi Yochanan Shita. The Omer Beinhu Bein Achin Ein Chayav and Lo Ala Chalutza Kares V'Lo Ala Tzarasa Kares. That Rabbi Yochanan says that not only with the chalutza, if you have relations with her, do you not get kares, but even with the tzara you don't get kares. According to what we're saying now, the tzara is an eishesach and you should get kares for her. So this seems to be a contradiction to Rabbi Yochanan. So Amar Lacha Rabbi Yochanan v'tispera achos chalutza de oraisa. Hold on a second, says Rabbi Yochanan. Does it make sense to even say that the sister of a chalutza is an isser de oraisa? V'ha'amar reish lakish kan shana Rebbe achos grusha medivrei Torah achos chalutza medivrei sofrim. He says, Rabbi Yochanan says, hold on a second. The whole principle of an achos chalutza is only asr midrabanan. So I hold, taka, that at tzara, there's only an isser lav on her, just like the chalutza, because the tzara, once you do chalitza with A, it's as if you did chalitza with A and B. And each one of them has a status of a somewhat of a chalutza. But when the rabbis forbade the relatives of the chalutza, they only forbade the actual relatives of the chalutza, not the relatives of the tzara. That has no bearing on the status of the tzara. I hold that the tzara is like a chalutza in this respect also, that there's only a mitzvah lo saseh upon her, there's no asir kares. But you can't extrapolate from there that just like the chalutza's relatives are asir, so too the tzara's relatives are asir, because it's all a rabbinic prohibition to begin with. It's not a biblical prohibition, and therefore it's not a contradiction to Rabbi Yochanan. But the bottom line is that a Yavam is allowed to marry the relatives of the tzara of his chalutza. But what is he not allowed to marry? He's not allowed to marry the tzara of the chalutza's relative. And we're going to see why tomorrow, because we've run out of time.